My name is Christine, and I'm a 41-year-old housewife. I met my husband Mark at work, and we got married. After 5 years of marriage, we had our son Jake, who is now 5 years old. At this age, he's so cute, and I would love to spend all day with him if I could. But because of our financial situation, I have to work and leave him at daycare to help with our income. Jake asked me to make him an omelette tomorrow. How could I say no to such a sweet request? Maybe he understands my busy schedule because he never asks for anything too complicated. Or maybe it's just because I'm not great at cooking elaborate dishes. I find making omelettes tricky, but I'm probably just making excuses for myself. When Jake was born, Mark was very happy. He was our miracle after many years of trying. We used to be a close family, going on drives and visiting the park every weekend. But things started changing when Jake turned 3. After that, Mark began coming home late more often. He had been complaining about how he couldn't handle Jake's fussiness, and maybe that's why he stayed out late. Whenever Mark called to say he was working overnight, I felt disappointed. I found out from one of Mark's colleagues that he was actually spending his time playing slot machines at restaurants and cinemas. Since Mark and I met at work, his colleagues are also my former colleagues. I left my job after we got married and started working part-time, but I still keep in touch with my old coworkers. Mark knows this, so I don't understand why he thinks I wouldn't find out about his actions. It bothers me, but I'd rather have Mark come home late than deal with him being frustrated with Jake's fussiness. I never said anything because I didn't want to cause more trouble. Mark's late nights kept getting worse, sometimes even until morning. Sometimes I could smell perfume on his suit, and it upset me. I feel angry at times, but Mark was a decent father when Jake wasn't being fussy, so I tried to ignore his behavior. 2 years have passed, and Jake is now a cheeky and energetic 5-year-old. I'm amazed by how much he's grown, but I'm fed up with Mark's bad attitude. One day, Jake spilled some tea, and Mark got angry. "What's wrong with you? You're 5 now and still can't hold a cup properly," Mark yelled. It's hard to handle situations like this when Mark reacts so harshly. Mark often yells, "I'm busy, don't bother me," and refuses to play with Jake. When I ask about dinner, he says, "I don't need dinner," and complains about the chaotic environment. He even says he doesn't want to eat the food I cook and decides to eat out instead. Mark gets angry over everything I say. I suggested we go somewhere on his next day off, but he snapped, "I'm tired from work. Let me rest." No matter what I say, he just yells, and we can't have a proper conversation. I sometimes wonder if Mark is still stuck in his terrible threes phase from when he was a child. I once asked him why he's always so angry, and he snapped that it's because I'm useless and that I'm passing that trait onto Jake. He even said Jake should be more like him and less like me. It hurt to hear him say that. Mark seemed to think all of Jake's good qualities came from him, and the bad ones came from me. I was deeply hurt by his words and actions, and I even considered divorcing him. He was close to ending our marriage with his behavior and lack of respect. Despite everything, I stayed because I still loved Mark, and even though Jake was scared of him, he loved him too. I was exhausted from living with someone who was rarely in a good mood, but I didn't have the courage to break up our family. One day, Mark told me he was going on a trip with some work colleagues I know. You know, the 2 guys who are always enjoying their single lives. Mark decided to join them on their trip. "Seriously?" I asked. Mark said, "What's wrong with that? I've been patient for a long time. This family takes up all my time, and I never get a break. Plus, you spend all the money I earn on useless luxuries. I have the right to relax once in a while." I tried to explain, "I'm not spending money on luxuries. We live frugally because you only give me the bare minimum. I work hard, and the more I earn, the less you contribute to our family. I actually put in more than you, while you probably waste your money." Mark cut me off. "Shut up. I'm going away 4 weeks from tomorrow, whether you like it or not. And don't complain." I was shocked that he was leaving so soon. Before I could respond, I heard Jake calling out, "Mommy." He had woken up from his nap. I hurried to him and said, "I'm sorry, Jake. Did I wake you up? Let's go back to your room so I can stay with you." But as soon as I touched him, I realized something was wrong. "Jake, you're so hot," I said. "Mommy, my head hurts," he replied. His eyes rolled back, and he collapsed. Panicked, I called an ambulance. I expected Mark to come with us, but he refused. I wanted to argue, but there was no time. I had no choice but to go to the hospital alone with Jake. Luckily, the test showed that Jake wasn't seriously ill, but he was admitted to the hospital for more tests just to be sure. I called Mark to uptake him and asked him to bring a change of clothes for the hospital stay. Mark sounded extremely annoyed and responded, "Are you joking? I can't make it. I don't want to be late for tomorrow's trip, so I'm staying at my colleague's place tonight." I was stunned. "Are you serious? Your son is in the hospital and you're still going on a trip?" Mark replied, "Of course I am. He's just having a simple checkup. There's nothing I can do, and I don't want to miss the trip." I argued, "Yes, there is. I asked you two for advice." But before I could say more, Mark hung up on me. I tried calling him back, but it went straight to voicemail. My anger grew, and I felt helpless. Since I didn't have his colleague's number, I called my parents for help. I was furious that Mark abandoned Jake in the hospital. This was a serious issue, and I felt like the next mistake would be the final straw. 3 days later, the tests were complete, and Jake was back to his usual energetic self. The results showed no problems, and he would be discharged the next day. I planned to buy him some pudding as a treat. As I was checking my phone for messages, it suddenly started vibrating. I almost dropped it but managed to answer the call from my former colleague, Cindy. "Christine, where are you?" Cindy's voice sounded panicked. "I'm at the hospital. What's going on?" I asked. Cindy replied urgently, "Forget about that. It's an emergency. Your husband was in an accident. He's dead." I was stunned and confused by Cindy's call. "What? This can't be true," I said, thinking it was a joke, but Cindy's voice was serious, and I ran out in a panic. Mark had passed away. The news was shocking, but Cindy continued, explaining that Mark was on a trip with a woman who had crashed the car into a tree. I couldn't believe it. Mark was supposed to be traveling with his male colleagues, not a woman. There had to be a mistake. I called my parents to ask them to look after Jake and rushed to the hospital where Mark was said to be. Amid my panic, I wondered why the company had called me before I was informed directly. According to Cindy, the men who were supposed to be with Mark were safe, meaning they weren't with him. Mark had lied about being with them and was actually with another woman. This was a huge betrayal. When I arrived at the hospital, I found Mark in a room. To my surprise, he was alive. His hands and feet were bandaged, but he was breathing. Cindy's news was wrong. "Mark, you're alive," I said, approaching him. His eyes were slightly open, and he seemed a bit shaken. Maybe he hadn't expected the company to contact me so quickly. In his usual grumpy tone, Mark said, "Took you long enough. Your husband's been in an accident, and it takes you ages to get here. You useless piece off." It was frustrating to see him so unchanged despite his injuries. He had only broken his left hand and right leg. The rental car was totaled, but it seemed he had managed to escape with relatively minor injuries. "I'm glad you're okay," I told Mark. He replied, "You better take good care of me." It was clear he was feeling fine. "Well, let's get to it. You may have escaped death, but you don't get a pass on 3 strikes. I pulled out a sheet of paper. When I say I'm glad you're okay, I'm really talking about your right hand. If you'd broken it, you wouldn't be able to sign this." Mark looked confused. "What are you talking about?" I unfolded the paper and said, "Divorce papers." Mark was shocked. "You're joking. Why would I sign this?" I said, "Oh, we told your girlfriend you were getting a divorce, didn't you? The reason you came home late every night was because you were with her. Was this trip a prenuptial getaway? Good for you. Now you can marry your sweet Michelle." Mark asked, "How do you even know her name?" I replied, "Because I spoke to her. Before coming to your hospital room, I stopped by the room of the woman you were with. She was also in the hospital. I found her and asked her about the accident. She had broken some bones but was in better shape than Mark. Her parents were with her, and I talked to her. I couldn't tell her I was coming to see Mark, so I just spoke with her without knowing if Mark was alive or dead. When I found out Mark was alive, I was relieved, but the woman's parents were questioning her intensely. She looked at me and said, 'Let him go. I don't know what you see in him. He's never around for his family, doesn't pay his bills, goes out every night, and doesn't care when his kid is in the hospital. And then there's the cheating.'" "It's game over," I said, watching Mark's face turn pale. I had expected him to get defensive, but that didn't change my mind. No, she's just for fun, you know. You're the only one I love," Mark stammered. I ignored his pleas. "Stop, I've filled out the form with my part. Even if you tear it up, I have plenty of copies. I could just call a lawyer. A lawyer? Mark asked, startled. Yes, we need to figure out alimony and child support. That's why a lawyer would be better, I said. Mark pleaded. Wait a second. Please reconsider. I gave him a stern look, and he immediately shrank back. I don't want a divorce, he stuttered. Why not? I asked. Let me say it for both of us. You get to spend money however you like and have fun with young women, while I handle all the hard work at home. You have a wife for security and a girlfriend for enjoyment. It's a great setup. But if we divorce, that perfect life plan will be over, right? Mark's mouth hung open, and he was speechless. Sorry to tell you, but your perfect life plan is now ruined. You can start a new plan with Michelle or whoever you like, but my son and I won't be a part of it. Just pretend you're dead and start over. After saying everything I needed to, I turned to leave the room. Mark's weak voice called out, but I didn't look back. In the following days, I hired a lawyer and began the divorce process. This included discussions with Michelle, who had been discharged from a hospital. Mark tried to say he had no intention of divorcing me, but it was too late. Michelle was furious when I brought up alimony payments. They had a huge fight, with Michelle shouting, "You've ruined my life. I don't care about a woman who goes after married men. You're the one who made a pass at me." Mark defended himself. Shut up, I never did that. I just wanted them to hurry up and sign the papers. I watched them argue in silence. Despite Mark's resistance, the evidence was clear, and our divorce was finalized. I got almost all the alimony I wanted, and child support was to be paid in one lump sum. After everything was settled, my lawyer and I left the room, but Mark and Michelle were still fighting. I wondered what would happen to their relationship, but quickly realized I didn't care. Before leaving, I told them, I hope you have a lovely life together. It might have been petty, but I hoped Jake wouldn't pick up on my pettiness. Despite everything that had happened, Jake and I settled into a peaceful life. Without Mark's mood swings, Jake became surprisingly cheerful. I regretted not getting a divorce sooner. Mark's behavior must have caused my son a lot of pain. I wondered why I had stayed with such a terrible husband. Living just with Jake, I realized we were perfectly fine without Mark. Every day was a joy. Although Mark is Jake's father, and if he wants to see him, I would let him. I asked Jake, "Do you want to see Daddy?" He replied, "No, why?" After the divorce was finalized, I emailed Mark to confirm that the alimony and child support payments had been made. He responded immediately with the subject line, "Help." I opened Mark's email, and it was almost laughable. He explained that my former colleague had shared the story of his cheating with the entire company. As a result, Mark was stressed and made mistakes at work, leading him to lose his job. He wrote, "My parents have cut me off, and I have nowhere to go. I can't live like this. Please help me." I couldn't believe it. I decided to be kind and replied, "Why don't you ask your sweet Michelle to help you?" Mark responded, "I broke up with Michelle. Her parents cut her off too, and now she's missing. I can think clearly now. You are the only one I love. Please help me." His message continued, "I'm behind on my cell phone bill, and it's going to stop working tomorrow. Please come and pick me up right away." I blocked him after that. We had moved long ago, and Mark had no way of finding us. As I put my phone down and sipped my tea, Jake came over and asked, "What should we do on our day off tomorrow, Mommy?" I thought for a moment and said, "How about we pack some lunch and go to the aquarium?" Jake's face lit up with a big smile. "Hey, I want to see the dolphin show." Seeing Jake so happy and excited made me smile too.